Good morning, all. Today's session is about FATF, that is Financial Action Task Force. Financial Action Task Force, its recommendations, and FSRBs are the sessions which are being discussed today. This is a very important topic in CAMS exam because many of the questions are asked about the recommendations regarding recommendations, how the recommendations are shaping the financial crime, AFC, and anti-financial crime framework. So these questions are very important because basically, recently the crypto assets are coming, cryptocurrencies are there into the financial crimes. The frauds are using cryptocurrencies. So intergovernmental cooperation is also essential because when the trail of the money, we need to identify the trail of the money in anti-financial crime. In that aspect, when money is being sent from US to Switzerland, so the tracing of the money should be happening promptly. Then only we can arrest the financial crime. So that thing, we need proper intergovernmental cooperation between the countries. There should be proper guidelines for the countries to follow. So in these aspects, FATF plays a major role because without proper guidelines or recommendations, it is very difficult for function. So even though FATF is not a uh, regulatory body which controls the governments, its recommendations are followed almost by all the countries in the world because there are 40 members in including many different countries. 40 member countries are there, and other regional organizations are members of FATF. Along with that, FSRBs, there are 9 FSRBs, regional FSRBs, which are working in tandem with the FATF. So these FATF and FSRBs together help us to control the financial crimes to a certain level. So first of all, let's start. What is FATF? We need to identify, know what is FATF. So as the slide shows, it is the global pioneer body which was created to tackle financial crime. It was started in 1989. Its first initial mandate was just to examine money laundering techniques and set out measures to combat the money laundering techniques. But later in 2001, after the US 9/11 attacks, what happened was that its mandate was expanded to include terrorist financing and proliferation financing. So, as a CAMS candidate, the first point regarding FATF is that was first to it was first meant to control the money laundering, but later its scope got expanded due to terrorist financing because how the money for the terrorists was funded, how they how they managed to attack the US World Trade Center. These things led to the creation of the led to the inclusion of the terrorist financing into the mandate of the FATF. So the 40 recommendations which were earlier set by the FATF was expanded to special 9 recommendations to include the terrorist financing. Later, those 9 recommendations were also included inside these 40 recommendations. So hence now there are 40 recommendations which are to be followed for understanding the FATF recommendation. So let's go to the next slide. So what are the powers of FATF? Do FATF have any powers? That's first thing we need to know. As I mentioned earlier, it is not a regulatory body. It does not control the governments. It cannot mandate a government to do that, do this, like that. It cannot penalize any governments. Nothing. They does not have any powers like that. But the first and the foremost thing is it is a standard setting body. So it defines the rule of game. It gives 40 recommendations, and almost every banks in the world follow that. That is the biggest advantage or power of the FATF because all the financial institutions follows the recommendations given by the FATF. So it sets the standard for the how to play. So in a football match, we need to know how to play. The how to play is set by them, even though they does not have any monetary fine. They cannot put any fines like a in the case of in India, the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, is the regulatory body for the banks. So they set they have to set regulatory standards, and they can fine the banks if they does not follow the rules. FATF does not have any controlling powers, but they do have the power to set standards. And the most attractive fact is that the rules and the standards set by them are followed by the banks to a greater extent. The second power they do have, I believe, is The second power they do, they have got a listing mechanism. They can list certain countries that are not at all following their recommendations into blacklist, and certain countries which are under increased monitoring into gray list. So uh, in the example as it is said, the North Korea and Iran. North Korea and Iran are the two countries uh, which, as we know, Iran is now under the attack of US. So it, the US has put the Iran under sanction list. OFAC, the Office for Foreign Assets Control, have put Iran under the sanction list for many years. So actually, what the blacklist to do is blacklisting doing that they just give the other countries an idea that which countries are more prone to this money laundering or financial crimes. So we can other countries can avoid them. So if a country is put into the sanction list, then the other countries will not encourage doing trade with them, and they just isolate them. This just shrinks the country economically. So that's the problem with blacklist. So once FATF puts a country into blacklist, then that country is going to have tough time. And when it comes to gray list, it is not that strict as gray list, a blacklist. In the case of gray list, what is happening is that the country is trying to come out of the financial crime. So they have implemented the laws, but when it comes to the working of the laws, they may not be proper. There are financial crimes, but they are not reporting any suspicious action activity reports, or they are not prosecuting anyone who is doing the money laundering. So that's such things they have to rectify. So in the case of gray list, there is a chance of coming out of the list, but in the case of blacklist, the countries put under the sanctions of the US, of the UN sanction list. So like that, the country is under very much in big trouble in the case of blacklist. So that is the difference between blacklist and the gray list. Third thing is, so first again, just we are going back that the first thing is standard setting. It just sets 40 recommendations and 11 immediate outcomes to be followed by the countries, and the listing mechanism. And third is the mutual evaluation based on the recommendations and the immediate outcomes. FATF performs the evaluation of the countries periodically, and two or in 5 years. Every 5 years, they just conducts the mutual evaluation report. They just prepare a mutual evaluation report for every country, and based on that mutual evaluation, is the listing is done. If the country is not at all compliant with any of those recommendations, then they will be put into the either gray list or the blacklist. So that is the importance of the mutual evaluation. Third is the market influence. So even though it does not issue any fines, the private sector does the enforcement. So every global banks, every big banks, every countries are following the FATF guidelines in a very proper way. So it has got a very good influence. So it is very important for every countries to follow the guidelines and the recommendations given by the FATF. So limitations of the FATF. So no, we know that these are the FATFs have got a lot of powers like standard setting, listing mechanisms, market influence. That every country is considering the FATF guidelines as God. So these are the advantages they have, but they have got some limitations. As I told earlier, they does not have any prosecution power. It cannot investigate any individuals. It cannot freeze personal accounts like that. So it can only evaluate government. What they can do is they can evaluate the governments and provide them a mutual evaluation report. Based on the report, that country might respond and just come out of the listing, and they can do the transactions as earlier. So this is there does not have any prosecution power. That is one limitation of the FATF. The second is that no legislative authorities. This is not a lawmaking body. The lawmaking is done by the country's legislative authorities, and the laws are the country specific. But each country, the importance of the FATF comes from the facts that each country makes the money laundering or terrorist financing laws strictly based on the FATF guidelines. So the global guidelines given by the FATF are followed by the countries, even though does not have any legislative authorities. The third is a dependence on national enforcement. FATF is only as effective as the local police. So the enforcement is to be done at the regional or the national level. Political sensitivity, that is another big issue, because when we look into the mutual evaluation report of China, they may not be following all the recommendations or the immediate outcomes. Their mutual evaluation report shows that many of the the recommendations given by the FATF are not followed by China. Even then, they are not in the gray list or blacklist. Because why? Because due to the political sensitivity, it is a very big country. We cannot avoid China in world trade. So there is a political sensitivity also. Some small countries might be in the list, but the big countries or politically powerful countries may not be there in the list. So FATF is influenced by geopolitics. That is one of the limitations. The last one is de-risking side effects. So banks often overreact by cutting all services to that region. So some have in some poor countries in Africa, many of the countries are there in the gray list or gray list. What happens that their services, they may not be getting proper services from other countries or proper help from the other countries. So at sometimes the remittances may not be permitted because if any of the relative of a particular person, particular family in the African country might be working in Northeast, in Middle East. They may not be able to send remittances due to the restrictions put due to AML laws. So these are the limitations. These are some of the limitations under FATF. FATF is having. It's blacklist. So as I told earlier, there is blacklist and the gray list for FATF. But actually, the FATF is not maintaining a blacklist or gray list. Their list is called high risk jurisdiction subject to a call for action. So this is a very important thing we should understand for CAMS exam, because the gray blacklist actually is the FATF urges under the if a country is under the blacklist, FATF urges all member countries and global financial institutions to apply enhanced due diligence. So in the case of blacklist, EDD is required. So it calls for countermeasures which can include restricting or banning transaction with that country. So FATF asks the member countries to follow. These words are very important. That's why I'm just highlighting. It calls for countermeasures in restricting or banning transaction with that country. So in case of a country is under a blacklist, then FATF just asks for EDD and restricts other countries from doing transactions with that country. So being blacklisted, it's like an isolation. Even though we may be a major country and we may have very much good natural resources. Example, in the case of Iran is blessed with oil, but due to the sanctions put by the US, they are unable to do proper trade with the other countries. Since USD is the major currency in which world transactions are happening, the sanctions put by the US has restricted Iran in a major way. So that is it. So the most other important fact is that only three more countries are there in the blacklist: North Korea, Myanmar, and DPK. As of Jan 2026, North Korea, Iran, and Myanmar are there in the uh, blacklist or high risk jurisdiction subject to a call for action. High risk jurisdiction. The other is jurisdiction under increased monitoring. I think I list jurisdictions under increased monitoring. So the countries include Algeria, Angola, Lebanon, Monaco, Venezuela, Vietnam. So unlike blacklist, these countries are cooperating. So they are not non-cooperative countries. They are trying to improve their AFC regulations. They are trying to implement the AFC laws of the country in a proper way, but they need more time. That's the problem with the jurisdictions under increased monitoring or the grey list. So this grey list and blacklist are all named by journalists and not by the FATF's original wordings. So that's it. And that current status include these much countries. And the major fact was that lately, during the last quarter of the December 2025, South Africa and Nigeria were removed from the grey list. Okay, and then let's go to the FATF recommendation. This is a very important part in our discussion. So, first of all, the recommendations. There are 40 recommendations, as I have mentioned earlier. There are 40 recommendations. Among the 40 recommendations, these 40 recommendations can be divided into seven groups. So, first of all, the first group is recommendation 1 and 2. So AML and safety policies and coordination. This is the first pillar of first pillar. Let's divide it into seven pillars. In that case, the first pillar is AML, CFT policies and coordination. What is it's telling is that the first point is risk-based approach. So we must follow a risk-based approach in case of FATF is recommending that every financial institution or every country must follow a risk-based approach. So in order to implement if in that, what happens in a bank level is, if you're coming across a customer, we do customer due diligence as the first point. And then if a particular customer is a PEP or a high risk customer, then we perform the enhanced due diligence, identifying the source of wealth, source of fund of that particular customer. So we will come across what is the source of wealth and source of fund later. But the approach should be perfectly on a risk base. So we should not, for a low risk customer, we do not need to perform EDD. We can just do with this go with the CDD. So the risk allocation is the risk based approach is to be followed. That's the first thing told by the AML CFT policy. So also the country must have AML CFT policies. Laws and policies must be implemented at the first point. Also the country should maintain the national risk register. So these things are there. So first of all, the AML CFT policies and the coordination. The governments must ensure that central bank, police, and tax authorities have to work together to identify the money laundering techniques which are evolving day by day. So these are the first two recommendations given by the FATF. That is, we have to follow this. It's very important, and we have to understand what is each recommendation. Somehow we have to remember all this. First point is risk-based approach, and second thing is national coordination. The third is money laundering. The criminalization of money laundering is very important, and confiscation. Authorities must have the power to freeze and confiscate dirty money without delay. In certain countries, the financial intelligence unit itself has the power to confiscate. In certain other countries, that might be entrusted with the other body. In case of in India, what is happening is that if a particular bank is raising a suspicious transaction report, then that is forwarded to a financial intelligence unit. So let's make banks. So bank when a bank reports a particular suspicious transaction, it moves to FIUINT, financial intelligence unit in IND. FIUIND is the FIU body of India. Then that is getting, and if that particular transaction is a result of a predicate offense, then that transactions will be routed to the police or ED. If any confiscation of assets are required, then enforcement directorate will be involved. Later, based on the severity of the case, it will move to the court, and prosecution or something will happen. In case of US, what happens? The banks will be reporting the same to FinCEN. Then again, the same thing, police or the law enforcement authority, LEA will handle the thing, and later move to the court. So these are the way in which things are happening when a particular suspicious activity or suspicious transaction is reported. So based on the threshold of each country, different countries have different reporting thresholds. So based on the threshold, suspicious report is generated, and it is moved to the FIUs. So that's it. So uh, in case of, so money laundering must be made as a serious crime. There should be proper punishment, and it should be treated as a serious crime. So law must be made to make ML a serious crime. That's the third and fourth recommendation is telling. Criminalizing the terrorist financing. So as I told earlier, after the 9/11 attacks only, terrorist financing was included into the FATF's recommendations, and recommendation 5 is telling that the funding a terrorist must be crime even if no specific attack occurs. We should not wait an attack to occur. If it is found that a fund is moving towards a high risk jurisdiction and it is used by a terrorist, or it is used by a person who is under the UN sanction list, then there must be proper vigilance and ensure that the funding is not for the terrorist. So that is criminalizing the terrorist financing. And sanctions. So countries must immediately freeze the assets of people on UN sanction list. So recommendation 6 and 7. So What we have to there are seven pillars. Again, we are just collecting the things. There are seven pillars. Of that, the first pillar is telling that the country should have AML CFT policies and coordination, and the second pillar is telling that money laundering and confiscation should be uh, made a serious crime and should be implemented in the laws of the country. And the other thing is terrorist financing and proliferation financing, which covers recommendations 5 to 8. The and the next pillar is preventive measures. This is a very important section because this are the guidelines for the financial institutions of a particular country from 9 to 23. What they should do is mentioned here. First is CDD. Before 1989 or the introduction of FATF, there was never a concept called KYC because banks may be opening the accounts, but maintaining of the KYC ID proofs and documents were not that necessary or that insisted. But after this, the recommendation 10 of FATF specifically asked the banks to follow CDD. And secondly, PEPs. When it comes to PEPs, what is happening that we should apply enhanced due diligence. Recommendations 15 is regarding cryptocurrencies and virtual asset service providers. So when it comes to in UAE, there is VARA Act, which Virtual Asset Regulatory Authority is the it it checks the transactions through VASPs and cryptocurrencies and ensures that the all the transactions are going in a proper way. So the new technologies recommendations regarding new technologies included in recommendation 50. The travel rule, when the SWIFT message is happening, we need to check with that the transactions are happening properly. So that when it comes to Swift, what is happening that we should follow. This is a message. How a Swift message fulfill the travel rule. See that originator account number, originator address, beneficiary name, beneficiary account number, and unique transaction ID in MT103. These fields must be properly mentioned, and the transaction should the ordering customer and the beneficiary customer details should be identified by a particular financial institution that is necessary. Okay, next, fifth, transparency and beneficial ownership. The ultimate beneficial owner. The bank should identify that who is an ultimate beneficial owner. Just I will show another picture. So identifying ultimate beneficial owner is very important. That if a particular minute. Ah, if a particular a company is owned by two natural persons, and sorry, if a particular company is owned by uh, one natural person and a company, then we should identify who is the natural person, who is the owner of that particular company. Then only we can identify the who is the owner of the company A. If a company A is owned by company B and a person called C, then a person C is having 20% ownership, and the person company B is having 80% ownership. Then we should trace behind the who are the natural owners of company B. Then only we can identify the ownership of the company A, ultimate beneficial ownership of the company. We should trace till the who is the natural person behind a particular entity. That is the requirement of UBO. The other thing is powers of competent authorities, the Commerce 2026 to 35. It insists, the recommendation 29 is a very important thing because FIUs, every country is supposed to have a financial intelligence unit. So recommendation 29 insists that every country should have a FIU to receive and analyze suspicious activity report. SARs must be filed by banks to FIUs. Law enforcement, police must have legal tools. Recommendation 30 to 31 insists on having a law enforcement agencies. The last is 36 to 40, that is international cooperation. For transferring of evidence, in the case of FIUs, what is happening is that Egmont Group is the Egmont Groups controls uh, all the FIUs of different countries. So there is an informal sharing of documents between the FIUs. So if a particular country is having a money laundering issue and then the proceeds are transferred to other country, if there is a need for data collection at the earliest, then what happens that Egmont Group can coordinate the transfer of documents, informal sharing of documents between FIUs of different countries. Like that, mutual legal assistance. If a country, if UAE and India is having MLA, mutual legal assistance, then at the government level, transferring of evidence can happen in a formal way. So that is with the mutual legal assistance. So these recommendations insist for the cooperation between the countries. At last, the immediate outcomes, as I told earlier, recommendations and immediate outcomes comes together. So the analysis mutual evaluation is performed based on both these things. But when recommendations give insist on the countries to follow the guidelines, but outcomes check whether the guidelines or the recommendations are followed correctly. First of all, risk and policy. Does the country understand its risk? So without just implementing the policies and laws are not sufficient. The proper the walking the word, the we just we have to follow the recommendations properly, that every country must make it sure that the recommendations are followed correctly. So the risk and policy, does the country understand its risk? International cooperation, do they help other countries? So like that, these are the 11 recommendations. Like MER is prepared based on both the immediate outcomes and the recommendations. Lastly, FSRBs. So FSRBs are FATF style regional bodies. So there are nine autonomous international organizations that act as regional gatekeepers. So in each region, even in Asia Pacific region, in Middle East and North African region, in Europe, in North America, in every region there is different regional specific FSRBs. So these FSRBs, even though they are different from FATF, but they follow the standards set by the FATF. So these are the just I need to discuss just three more MCQs based on the class which I have done. And let's see what is this in the context of FATF mutual evaluation. What is the primary difference between technical compliance and effectiveness? So the technical compliance measures the numbers of STRs filed, while effectiveness measures their quality. No, the first option is not correct, because what is technical compliance is doing? Technical compliance is the assessing the legal framework against the 40 recommendation. It assesses the 40 recommendations were implemented properly by the country. That is happening there. So the first option is not correct. The second thing is technical compliance is for G20 nations. No, it is not for G20 nations. It is for every countries who are the members of FATF or FSRBs. So that is also not correct. The third option is the right one, because the technical compliance assess the legal framework against the 40 recommendations. So, and effectiveness assess the achievement of 11 immediate outcomes. So the checking of immediate outcomes and 40 recommendations is done through technical compliance and effectiveness. So the option C is the right answer. Next thing is, which FATF recommendation requires countries to ensure that their competent authorities can obtain or have access in a timely fashion to adequate, accurate, and current information on the beneficial ownership and control of legal persons. So when it comes to beneficial ownership, the recommendations are 24 and 25. Ultimate beneficial ownership should be identified as per the recommendations 24 and 25. So that is the answer. So option D is the answer. Last one is, according to FATF standards, what is the required action when a financial institution is unable to comply with the relevant customer due diligence? So customer due diligence is essential for opening an account. So we cannot open an account without proper customer due diligence. We need to verify the proper documents are obtained and they are valid and they are verified. So uh, it must notify the client and give them 30 days to provide the documents. Option A says that notify the client and give them 30 days. That's not happening, because we cannot do that. We have to obtain the documents, then only open the account. So option A is wrong. B says that it must freeze the client's existing assets immediately. We cannot do that. That's also wrong action. Third one, it should not open the account, should terminate the business relationship, and should consider filing an STR. C is the answer, because there might be something suspicious, because the customer is not providing the documents for CDD. So that is, then in that case we cannot open the account, and also we should terminate the business relationship and file an STR. Thank you. Thank you for today's classes. Thank you. Bye.